Hey guys, welcome to Capture the World. I'm fighting a person. Today I'm just going to talk about some problems that Skyblock has. It's really the first and possibly smallest point I want to talk about is just the lack of updates that Skyblock has been getting. A small update every now and again would be way better than what has been happening. Like, they just update it once rarely. And if they were updating the game more frequently, it would actually have way more content to explore instead of just grinding towards things that already exist. And you could argue that Pets update added in a lot of new content, but I'm going to talk about the Pets update here in a minute because I really do not like the update. I have pretty much nothing positive to say about it, honestly. Like, there's a lot of unique things about it, but overall, the update, it's just like, yeah, the same things. It didn't really add any new content, it just added new items to pre-existing, like, grinds. Like, Enderman killing, that already existed, and you just get pets from it now. They didn't really add anything, except for the fact that you can get pets from that now. And there's a lot of things where it's like, these pets, they just don't have anything interesting about them to make up for. And really, just if they updated the game with a small update, maybe a few new items, a few new, like, Slayer bosses, a new, like, island to explore every week or so, then that would be so much better than what we've been getting, right? We get almost no new content ever that's actually, like, good content. And if they just added a couple of things every now and again, like every week, they just updated a couple things, and just not, like, the huge updates that they've been doing, that'd probably be way better than what they've been doing so far with their just big updates every now and again. Like, especially with a lot of the things they've been adding, like pets, that's really not that big considering how long it took for the pets update to come out. Like, if they had just been adding a few things every now and then in between then, it would have been way better. Because it would have felt like, oh, okay, that's just mean. It would have felt like there's more content overall in that update, even if that update was still the same, if there had been other things added to the game in between the updates, like the bigger updates, you know. And a game that has had, like, smaller updates in the past, like, instead of always big updates, like, literally one of the most popular games ever. Love it or hate it, Fortnite had, like, some smaller updates and they had some bigger updates. Sometimes they had an update where they added in just one gun. Sometimes they revamped entire parts of, like, the world. Like, their season updates compared to their mid-season updates, completely different. But both of them still added a ton of content into the game and made the game way more interesting and had a lot more depth and was way more dynamic than it would otherwise be without those updates. The smaller, frequent updates. More frequent. They weren't, like, incredibly frequent, right? You don't have to make things incredibly frequent. But there is a problem with how Fortnite was doing things, and that's because a lot of their updates ended up having, like, major bugs in them, right? Like, they had major game-breaking glitches a lot of the time. And really, that just comes from a lack of being careful, I feel like. And if they just maybe bit off a little more than they could chew in a lot of those updates. But this is Minecraft. Like, in that, they have... In a game like Fortnite, and you're developing that, you have to think about so many more things. There's so many more things that could go wrong. So many more variables. Like, so many more things to consider. Because they have all these interesting things. They're programming a game from scratch instead of just using Minecraft as a base for a different, like, for a new game mode, right? And that's way different. For Hypixel, just adding in a couple new items, a couple new bosses every now and again, that would probably be pretty easy. And it would be very doable. Oh, it's man. Okay. It'd be very doable. Instead of being impossible tasks of updating their game majorly every week like they had initially been going to. So that's my first point in a potential solution, being there aren't enough like updates to keep the game really having a lot of new content a lot of the time. Things get stale, right? That's the problem, and the solution is just to add like smaller updates every week, because instead of doing the original plan of major updates every week, just having really smaller updates that don't add that much and don't have that many risks of glitches, instead of like, yeah, because the initial plan for skyblock of weekly updates, that was very unreasonable no matter what, like big updates. But like smaller updates, that would be somewhat possible, right? Another point I have is just like the game gets a little too grindy in a bad way, right? You have good grindy games where you actually have a lot of like it's really repetitive and you're doing a lot of the same things, but it's still like interesting and there's still a lot of new things that you're actually doing. Like there's new challenges and more interesting things to explore instead of just the same exact thing over and over again. Because I mean, really, a grindy game, it shouldn't be the literal exact same thing over and over again. There should be some variation, or at least some potential for variation. So to go over one part, there's actually really two parts to this game, to skyblock being a little too grindy. And for the first part, I just want to compare the game to another game, like another game. It's not even a mini game of Minecraft. It's like its own separate game, right? It's called Dauntless. You might have heard of it. And like the game, okay. So the best way that I could compare it, compare Dauntless to skyblock is just with the Slayer quests, because Dauntless, you're basically just farming enemies over and over again, right? But they're like boss enemies. They're not just weak one-shot enemies. They're all bosses. And you have to try and like kill them on hunts with your teammates. And so every time you go into there, you have a unique moveset for different characters. You have unique weapons you can find, unique abilities, right? It's nothing insane. But like the game overall, it's pretty good, and it has a lot of interesting dynamic parts to its combat system that make the grindiness not feel like the same repetitive task. It seems like the same objective, but with different ways of solving problems. And truthfully, that's just like one of the most amazing things of games, right? Of like good games, where you can solve problems and figure out like better solutions to things. That's one of the biggest beauties of regular Minecraft. There's so many different weird problems you can come up with, and there's so many solutions. And it's not just the same exact task over and over again, unless you want it to be, really. And it's pretty much the same with Dauntless, right? Like regular Minecraft, you have all these different like bosses you can fight, and then you have you have like you can just fight the bosses in the same way every time. There's nothing making you come up with better solutions and getting better abilities. And really, like, you could do the same thing, but you don't have to. There's still unique things that you can do. There's still unique solutions, unique ways of fighting and playing the game. And that's really something that skyblock doesn't have, right? Skyblock, you have exactly one way to do most things. There's some things where you have multiple ways. And there's some really broad things. Like, there's multiple ways to make coins, right? But, like, are there multiple really good ways? There's a couple. But then, like, pretty much end game, you can get lucky. You can... Really, there's nothing else, honestly. You can fight dragons and do Slayer. And all of those are just luck, right? You can auction flip, too. And that's not as much of luck. There's a lot of skill in auction flipping, but it's not truthfully just, like, the main, like, playing the game. It's more of its own unique thing within skyblock. And so now I've talked about how Dauntless actually does things well. Let's talk about how this differs extremely from skyblock Slayer quests, right? So, Slayer quests, I've already talked a little bit about this, right? You have the same solutions a lot of the times. And there's not anything interesting to do. There's no, like, real interesting progression. And one of the worst parts here is that there's no real skill involved with the Slayer quest, except for the skill with getting your gear. Because once you have your gear, like, that's the only real skill, is getting your gear. Once you have good enough items to just tank through the bosses, that's when you're going to do well against the bosses. You can't just be good at the game and dodge their attacks. You're even punished for doing this, because they heal up if you're dodging their attacks. They literally heal to punish you for dodging attacks and being, like, avoiding damage instead of just having to tank through it. So really what this means, it's not exactly a problem, but it does mean that there's little skill in the fight itself, and that just makes the fights themselves feel very boring and bland, and there's just nothing really that you can do to make your experience better. Because, I mean, literally a tier 4 Sven can one-shot someone in superior armor. They can literally one-shot someone in superior armor. I mean, granted, if you have good enough stuff, it's probably not going to happen to you very often, if at all. But the fact that it can happen at all, and you can't dodge it, you can't stop it, and it's literally just luck, whether you win or lose with your superior armor, right? Like, this is kind of dumb. Because it deals true damage, which literally, true damage, all that means is it's ignoring the only way that you can consistently beat Slayer bosses, right? And that just makes it, like, less consistent for the boss fights themselves. Not to mention the drops are incredibly inconsistent. Because the drops for Slayer quests, they are so inconsistent. It's imagine Cookie Clicker, right? Imagine playing Cookie Clicker. It's a bad game, right? Now imagine it, but every time you click the cookie, it takes like 10 minutes to click on it, and once you do click on it, it's not guaranteed that you'll get your cookie. Like, it's still just a question, still luck whether you get your cookie or not after you've clicked on it, and after it's taken you 10 minutes to click on it, and even more time to prepare yourself for clicking on it. Like, you don't wanna not get your cookie after you worked so hard for it, right? After you've gotten all this good gear and you spent your money and everything. Well, not real money, just in-game money, but still. Like, you don't want to just not get your reward after you put in a ton of effort. And really just, like, a lot of the things in this, like RNGesus drops, why do they exist? Why is there no way to increase your odds of getting those items except for fighting more bosses? Like, there should be some interesting way to get more overflux capacitors than just get lucky. Especially when you consider that the odds of you getting one are so slim that you're probably just going to have to buy your own overflux capacitor or orb from someone who did get lucky. And someone who just doesn't really need it or want it, right? You should definitely be able to get every item without needing to buy it from other players. Wait a minute. Do I have a flag? I do have it. What am I doing going back? I'm a crackhead, okay. Like, there has to be some way of guaranteeing that you'll get your items and drops from the Slayer bosses. Because if you can't guarantee that you get the drops, even if it's something super simple, like if you kill 100 Sven Force, you get your overflux capacitor. Or if you kill 50 of them, you get your red claw egg, right? Or if you have extra quests within the Slayer quests to actually get your items after a certain amount of stuff. And you have to do specific things to get them. Right? There just has to be some way of consistently getting these items instead of just having to get lucky. So basically the issue I've described is that combat is too bland for you to just not get your items sometimes. You have to have some interesting way for Slayer bosses and for dragons to actually kill them in order to make up for the lack of items. Or at the very, very least, you have to add in a way of consistently getting the items from the bosses. Preferably both, honestly. If you add in both of those solutions, then Slayer bosses and Ender Dragons would feel so much better to fight. And there would actually be a point in fighting them without having to, like, no-life the game pretty much. Because that's pretty much what you have to do at this point if you want to actually play the game and get all of these, like, incredible items. If you want to be one of the, like, the better players, not even one of the best, just, like, doing okay for yourself, being able to get some of the top tier items, pretty much have to just get ridiculously lucky, and you have to play a ton of the game, like way more of the game than you should have to play. And especially the boring parts of the game, where it's just like, this could actually be interesting. And I mean, a lot of people like Slayer quests because they just like relaxing, I guess. But even then, having to put in a ton of effort and not getting rewarded for it is super stupid. Alright, so I know there's been a lot of talk about dungeons and whatnot, and I guess I want to quickly, very briefly touch on dungeons and how they could potentially, like, ensure that skyblock stays terrible and just a glorified cookie clicker, or they could easily completely change and fix the game. I still think that a lot of the other changes that I've mentioned should be done, at least in some capacity, to make other parts of the game feel better than just dungeons once they come out. But like, oh gosh, like, dungeons have the potential to be like really, really good. So quickly, dungeons, right? They're supposedly gonna have way better AI than regular mobs to make the fights more interesting. And hopefully that's true. Hopefully the dungeons end up being super fun and interesting to actually go through, and it's like interesting dynamic things, maybe puzzles, maybe just hard enemies to beat that are actually skill-based enemies instead of, oh, I one-shot the like an enemy and then I spent a ton of time on this boss and I just clicked on it and hoped that it didn't kill me, right? Because I mean, they've talked a lot about making actually like good AI, right? And that's why they said Dungeons is taking so long to come out. And like, hopefully it's completely skill-based with just a little bit of gear, right? Like, obviously you aren't going to be taking on the strongest dungeon with no weapons, no armor. You're going to have some gear to take it on, right? And that's always good. You never want someone with pure skill to just come along and obliterate your entire dungeon. You want to have some amount of like gear involved and have them actually have to work for the gear in order to fight the boss. It makes the game more interesting. It makes everything just better overall. And it makes people who are worse at the game still have an actual chance. Like, worse at combat. Even if it's just the combat that they're worse at, it still gives them an actual chance to do things. So I'm really hoping that they have more skill-based, but still somewhat gear-based dungeons. Because that would be very interesting. And overall, it'd be a lot more fun than most of the things that Skyblock has had in the past. So yeah, if you liked the video or agree with my opinions, make sure to leave a like on the video. And thanks so much for watching. If you want to see some of my other videos, I mostly do just gaming and not a whole lot of just actually talking about issues that I think the server has. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check out my other videos. There'll be a link in the top right of your screen. And goodbye. Oh wait, I forgot that all of my videos end with me jumping off the edge. Goodbye.